At this very moment, even if you had a sensible dinner last night, slept well, and woke up feeling perfectly normal, your body is producing very little growth hormone. The surprising part is that this is not simply because you're getting older. It has far more to do with how recently you ate. The science behind this process is incredibly specific, reversible, and supported by decades of research, yet it remains something most people rarely hear about. By the time we walk through each stage of what happens when you delay your first meal until noon, you'll understand why so many adults over 50 feel like their metabolism is struggling. You'll also discover why a simple adjustment in meal timing can have a profound effect on energy, fat burning, and overall metabolic health. Most people assume the main problem is sugar, carbohydrates, or processed foods. While those factors certainly play a role, the real hidden issue is something else entirely: insulin that stays elevated for too long. Insulin is designed to be a temporary messenger. It rises when you eat, helps move nutrients where they need to go, and then falls again. The problem begins when it never fully returns to baseline. For millions of people, that is exactly what's happening because they eat frequently from early morning until late at night. What makes this so interesting is that the modern food environment practically encourages constant eating. Larger portions, endless snack options, and late-night food culture have gradually shortened the time between dinner and breakfast. It's not necessarily the result of some grand plan. Companies are simply very effective at creating products people want to consume more often. Biologically, every time you eat, your pancreas releases insulin. This happens with meals, snacks, fruit, and even foods most people consider healthy. Its primary role is to move glucose into cells. But insulin also sends another important signal. It tells fat cells to stop releasing stored energy. Imagine a warehouse filled with fuel reserves. Insulin acts like the manager who locks the doors. While the manager is present, nothing leaves storage. Once insulin falls and the manager leaves, those doors open and stored fat can finally be used for energy. The issue is that many people eat every few hours throughout the day. As a result, insulin rarely drops low enough for long enough to unlock those storage doors. Their bodies keep burning incoming fuel while leaving stored energy untouched. That's the trap, and escaping it requires timing more than willpower. Now let's look at what happens hour by hour when you finish dinner and don't eat again until noon the next day. During the first few hours after your evening meal, digestion is in full swing. Food is broken down into glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids. Blood sugar rises, and insulin responds accordingly. Depending on the meal, insulin levels can climb dramatically above fasting levels. At the same time, your liver begins storing excess glucose as glycogen, a compact form of energy storage. Think of glycogen as glucose packed away for later use. The liver can store around 100 grams, while muscles may hold several hundred grams more, depending on muscle mass and activity levels. This is also the period when many people feel satisfied or sleepy after eating. Blood flow shifts toward digestion, and certain nutrients influence neurotransmitters associated with relaxation. What often goes unnoticed is that growth hormone activity is being held back. Growth hormone plays a major role in muscle repair, fat metabolism, and maintaining healthy tissues. It is normally released in pulses during deep sleep, but high insulin levels interfere with that process. If dinner is eaten late and insulin remains elevated well into the night, part of that natural growth hormone window may be lost. One night won't make much difference, but years of this pattern can contribute to slower recovery, reduced fat burning, and gradual metabolic decline. Several hours later, insulin continues falling closer to baseline. While you sleep, the liver slowly releases stored glycogen to keep blood sugar stable. This process is coordinated by glucagon, a hormone that works opposite to insulin. At this stage, your body is no longer relying on fresh food. It's using energy that was previously stored. Think of it as a business operating from inventory after deliveries have stopped. One fascinating fact is that your brain consumes a remarkable amount of energy, despite representing only a small percentage of body weight. Throughout the night, your liver steadily supplies glucose to support memory consolidation, dreaming, emotional processing, and countless other neurological functions. This is important because it challenges the common belief that the brain immediately requires breakfast after waking. Human physiology evolved to function through extended periods without food, and the body is well equipped to maintain brain energy during those times. Around 5 to 6 hours into fasting, another shift begins. Insulin has fallen enough for fat cells to gradually release fatty acids into the bloodstream. An enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase becomes more active and starts breaking apart stored fat. These fatty acids are then transported to tissues that can use them directly as fuel. This process, known as lipolysis, is the first major step toward accessing stored body fat. As the fast continues, liver glycogen reserves slowly decline. Depending on activity levels and previous food intake, these stores may become significantly reduced by the early morning hours. When glycogen levels drop, the liver begins producing ketones from fatty acids. These compounds can cross into the brain and serve as an alternative fuel source. For the first time, the brain starts relying on both glucose and ketones for energy. Researchers often refer to this transition as the metabolic switch. For most of human history, this switch was activated regularly because food was not constantly available. The body naturally alternated between burning glucose and burning fat-derived fuels. Today, many people rarely experience this shift because they never spend enough time without eating. The machinery still exists, but it remains largely unused. This matters because metabolic flexibility is one of the hallmarks of good health. Cells function best when they can efficiently switch between different fuel sources. Studies have linked regular metabolic switching with improvements in insulin sensitivity, blood pressure, and markers of inflammation. When metabolic flexibility declines, people often notice energy crashes, difficulty losing weight, and mental sluggishness despite maintaining what seems like a reasonable diet. By the time fasting reaches approximately 12 hours, another remarkable process begins increasing significantly: autophagy. Autophagy is the body's cellular cleanup and recycling system. It identifies damaged proteins, dysfunctional cell components, and worn-out structures, then breaks them down into reusable building blocks. Rather than destruction, think of it as a renovation project. The body clears away old materials so healthier replacements can take their place. This process gained worldwide attention when groundbreaking research revealed just how important cellular recycling is for maintaining long-term health. Scientists discovered that autophagy becomes more active when the body spends enough time in a low insulin state. One reason is that fasting reduces activity in a growth-related pathway known as mTOR. When mTOR quiets down, cellular cleanup systems are able to accelerate. Research has shown measurable increases in autophagy-related markers during extended fasting periods. Scientists are particularly interested in how this process may influence aging, brain health, and the accumulation of damaged cellular material over time. While it would be inaccurate to claim fasting prevents diseases such as Alzheimer's, there is growing evidence that proper cellular maintenance plays an important role in protecting neurological function. This brings us to one of the biggest misconceptions in modern nutrition. For decades, people have been told that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. The message became so common that it was rarely questioned. It appeared in advertising campaigns, educational materials, and public health recommendations. However, when researchers began examining the evidence more carefully, the picture became far less clear. Large reviews of clinical studies found little consistent proof that breakfast provides unique metabolic advantages for healthy adults. In some cases, individuals who skipped breakfast actually consumed fewer calories throughout the day without overeating later. The takeaway isn't that breakfast is bad. It's that the idea of breakfast being universally necessary for metabolic health is not strongly supported by high-quality evidence. As the fasting window approaches 14 to 16 hours, the body enters what many researchers consider one of the most powerful phases. Insulin remains low, fat burning becomes more active, ketone production increases, and growth hormone levels rise significantly. This is where many people begin noticing improved mental clarity, steadier energy, and a greater ability to access stored body fat. Instead of constantly relying on incoming food, the body becomes increasingly efficient at using the fuel it has already stored. And all of this starts with something remarkably simple: allowing enough time between your last meal of the evening and your first meal the next day. Research has shown that extending a fast to 24 hours can cause growth hormone levels to rise dramatically, with some studies reporting increases of more than 1,000% above normal fed state levels in men. Findings published in major endocrinology journals have consistently highlighted this response. While a 16-hour fast doesn't create quite the same magnitude of increase, growth hormone secretion still rises noticeably during the later stages of an overnight fast compared to periods of frequent eating. For adults over 50, this matters for two major reasons. First, growth hormone encourages the body to use stored fat as fuel. Second, it helps protect lean muscle tissue while food intake is temporarily paused. One of the most common concerns about fasting is the fear of losing muscle. The evidence paints a more balanced picture. Short fasting periods, typically between 16 and 24 hours, do not appear to trigger muscle loss in the same way long-term calorie restriction can. During fasting, growth hormone levels rise, while norepinephrine also increases slightly. Together, these adaptations seem to help preserve muscle tissue while encouraging the body to rely more heavily on stored fat. Several reviews comparing fasting approaches with traditional calorie-cutting diets have found that fasting often protects lean body mass more effectively, even when overall calorie deficits are similar. The reason is simple. Your body has built-in survival systems. When food is temporarily unavailable, it does not immediately start sacrificing valuable muscle. Instead, it prioritizes stored energy reserves while working to keep muscles functional. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. Human beings were never designed to lose significant muscle simply because a meal was delayed for a few hours. At the same time, another interesting change is taking place. Levels of norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter linked to alertness and concentration, begin to rise. Many people expect fasting to make them sluggish, but the opposite often happens. As the morning progresses during a 16-hour fast, mental clarity frequently improves. There is a biological explanation for this effect. Ketones, especially beta-hydroxybutyrate, provide an efficient fuel source for the brain. While describing them as a cleaner fuel is somewhat simplified, it captures an important reality. The brain often functions exceptionally well when ketones become available. Research examining mild ketosis has reported improvements in areas such as attention, memory performance, and mental focus, particularly among middle-aged and older adults who maintain good metabolic flexibility. Another important player enters the picture during this stage, BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Think of BDNF as a support and maintenance signal for the brain. It helps existing neurons survive while encouraging the formation of new neural connections. Healthy levels of BDNF are associated with learning, memory, adaptability, and cognitive resilience. Lower levels, on the other hand, have been linked to depression, age-related cognitive decline, and reduced brain plasticity. Research from aging and neuroscience laboratories has identified intermittent fasting as one of the dietary strategies capable of increasing BDNF activity. The reason appears to be related to a phenomenon known as hormesis. Hormesis refers to the idea that small, manageable stressors can make the body stronger. Exercise works this way. Muscles are challenged and they adapt by becoming more capable. Fasting appears to trigger a similar adaptive response within the brain. When fuel becomes temporarily scarce, the brain activates pathways involved in repair, protection, and long-term resilience. In essence, the challenge itself stimulates improvement. Now let's talk about cortisol, because this topic generates endless confusion whenever fasting is discussed. Cortisol is often labeled the stress hormone, but that description is incomplete. Cortisol naturally follows a daily rhythm. One of its highest points occurs shortly after waking, a phenomenon known as the cortisol awakening response. Typically, cortisol rises sharply within the first half hour after getting out of bed and reaches its peak sometime during the early morning hours. Critics of morning fasting often argue that combining this cortisol surge with an empty stomach creates excessive stress and leads to muscle breakdown. There is a small element of truth in that concern, but the conclusion is usually exaggerated. Cortisol does help the liver generate glucose when needed. However, in a healthy person completing an overnight fast, this process is tightly regulated. The morning cortisol rise exists for a reason. It prepares the body for activity, increases alertness, and ensures adequate energy availability. This is very different from the chronic stress response associated with ongoing anxiety, poor sleep, or long-term psychological strain. Research does not show meaningful muscle loss from the normal cortisol increase that accompanies a standard 16-hour fasting window. What can contribute to muscle loss is repeated multi-day fasting, combined with inadequate protein intake over time. The mistake many people make is treating a healthy daily hormone rhythm as if it were the same thing as chronic stress. They are not remotely equivalent. Another fascinating process unfolds throughout the fasting period, and it receives far less attention than it deserves. Your digestive system contains an enormous network of neurons, often referred to as the second brain. This system communicates continuously with the rest of the body and benefits from periods of rest. Digestion requires significant energy. Between meals, the gastrointestinal tract shifts into maintenance mode and begins performing cleanup tasks. One of the most important of these processes is the migrating motor complex, a series of rhythmic contractions that sweep through the small intestine approximately every 90 minutes when no food is present. Many researchers describe it as the gut's housekeeping service. Its role is to move leftover material, bacteria, and debris through the digestive tract. Every time you eat, this process pauses. It only operates effectively during fasting periods. People who constantly snack throughout the day may rarely allow these cleaning cycles to finish. Over time, impaired housekeeping has been associated with digestive issues, including bacterial imbalances and symptoms such as bloating, excessive gas, and discomfort. A fasting window of roughly 16 hours gives the migrating motor complex multiple opportunities to complete its work uninterrupted. This brings us to one of the most important reasons fasting until noon becomes increasingly relevant with age. As people grow older, insulin sensitivity gradually declines. Cells become slightly less responsive to insulin signals, prompting the pancreas to release more insulin to achieve the same effect. At first, this change is subtle. Higher insulin leads to reduced access to stored fat. Reduced fat burning often contributes to gradual weight gain. Increased body fat further worsens insulin sensitivity. The cycle reinforces itself over time. Most people don't recognize it as a metabolic issue. They simply assume it's part of aging. The expanding waistline, lower energy levels, stubborn weight gain, and midday crashes become accepted as normal. Yet many of these experiences are strongly connected to metabolic changes that can be influenced by lifestyle choices. In recent years, researchers have begun focusing not only on calorie intake, but also on meal timing itself. Studies examining restricted eating windows have shown that many participants naturally consume fewer calories without consciously trying to diet. Improvements have also been observed in fasting insulin, blood pressure, cholesterol markers, and overall metabolic health. What's particularly interesting is that some benefits appear even when calories are not intentionally reduced. The explanation extends beyond simple calorie counting. Longer fasting periods create more opportunities for insulin to remain low, fat oxidation to occur, and internal repair systems to operate.